because the advantage of the wide ISAs have is the angles at which the musculature associated with their skeleton, like their rib cage and their pelvis, is generally more horizontal. Tremendous advantage for force output. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand and it is perfect. All right. Well, today is Wednesday. That means that tomorrow is Thursday, which means that we have the Coffee and Coaches Conference call tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Please join us. These groups have been great. The calls have been awesome. Really enjoying these. We will continue them. But again, please join us 6 a.m. tomorrow. Today's Q&A comes from Anthony. Anthony asked a question at askbillhartman@gmail.com. askbillhartman@gmail.com. In regards to bench press. So he actually watched some of the recent calls that I did with Ben. So Ben works with a lot of powerlifters. So we talked a lot of powerlifting. And Anthony came in and he says, hey, is there anything that you can do to help me with my bench press arch? Well, guess what, Anthony? We sort of answered this question almost a year ago. So I went back into the archives, dug it up for you, and so I'm going to replay that for you this morning, as I think you'll find it useful to answer your question. Just keep in mind that as we try to gain performance in powerlifting, and especially using some of the things that I've mentioned in this video, there are secondary consequences that you're going to have to pay attention to. So please take that into consideration. Okay, if you would like to participate in a 15-minute consultation, please go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and put 15-minute consultation in the subject line, and we'll arrange that at our mutual convenience. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. on the Coffee and Coaches Conference call. Have a great Wednesday. So Rena says, this is more of a powerlifting related question. What strategies, both breathing and postural, can those with narrow and wide ISAs use to maximize thoracic extension in the bench press as it relates to the rib cage? This is mostly regarding the setup to execute the lift. Any info on the role of ISAs in proper bench press execution would be much appreciated, actually. Okay, so now we get to take this concept, and what we're going to do is we're going to physically shape somebody into a position that's going to increase bench press performance. So let's talk about powerlifting in general first and foremost. So powerlifting is about force production under very, very heavy loads. There's no time constraint, essentially, like we would see like with Olympic weightlifting has a time constraint because of the technique that has to be used. So if you can grind out a bench press in 10 seconds, so be it. As long as you complete the lift, that's all that matters. Very, very strong exhalation strategies. Very, very high levels of concentric orientation. So we want to minimize eccentric orientation as much as possible, only enough to allow sufficient movement to be accessible to execute the lift. So high levels of range of motion actually can be detrimental under these circumstances. So if we can steal some range of motion, it actually allows us greater efficiency. We can put more effort into the lift itself and stay in a groove, because again, if we create a situation that physically limits our range of motion, then all that energy that we would normally have to use to control the position, we don't have to worry about. Now, there's secondary consequences, which we'll talk about, but for right now, let's talk performance. So what we want to do, regardless of your physical structure, so we talk about narrows and wides, what we want to do is create as much anterior posterior compression as possible, because the stronger the exhalation strategy, the greater the force output into the extremities, and then the more weight that I can lift. Now, there's a subtle difference between wides and narrows. So with the wides, you're going to want to emphasize the latissimus dorsi element of this posterior compression. So we're talking about below the level of T8. So we're talking about bilateral symmetrical lifts like barbell rows and lat pull downs being staples for the wide ISAs, because what we want to do is we want to create as much compression on that posterior aspect of that rib cage. Because the advantage of the wide ISAs have is the angles at which the musculature associated with their skeleton, like their rib cage and their pelvis, is generally more horizontal. Tremendous advantage for force output in things like a bench press or a squat or a deadlift. So if we can compress that lower posterior part of the rib cage, you immediately increase your arch, you immediately increase your compressive strategy, you immediately increase the amount of weight that you can lift. with a narrow, they tend to have greater expansion in the upper back compared to the wides. And so what we want to do is we want to emphasize more of the upper back type of compressive strategies that you would see associated with bilateral symmetrical face pulls, I's, T's, and Y's. Okay, so there's this subtle difference. Now, they'll still do lat pull downs, and they'll still do their rowing in a bilateral symmetrical manner, but we're talking about emphasis as far as the subtleties between structures. The wides are also going to probably benefit a lot more from doing the back extension type of things, or reverse hypers, because what they have to do to actually maximize their arching capabilities in the bench press, but also to carry over to the other lifts, is they have to close the lower posterior aspect of the pelvis as well, just like the lower posterior rib cage. On the narrow side of things, they're going to want to do things that are more associated with like a glute bridge or the barbell hip thrusting thing, because what that does is it compresses the backside of the pelvis. So we get a pelvis that instead of being nice and round like this, we want to flatten it out as much as possible. So your glute bridges and hip thrusts with your knees apart will actually help compress that strategy right there. And now you've got compression where you typically would have expansion in a narrow. And so again, the goal here is to maximize the performance regardless of health, increase the arching capabilities in a bench press. Now, let's state the obvious. Don't forget to bench press, because you got to practice the position, because it's very, very specific. And so all you have to do is get on YouTube, watch a bunch of videos about it, and you'll see a bunch of high-level powerlifters getting into the position, practice, practice, practice. The better you get at that, the more compressive strategy that you're going to get. The bench press itself is a compressive exercise, so let's not ignore the specificity. In regards to some of your other training, the sumo pulls, cross bench pullovers, a good old classic. So drop your hips below the level of the bench, arch backwards over the bench, and perform your pullovers. Another great compressive exercise. Now, secondary consequences. Here's the bad stuff. You're going to lose range of motion. Okay? Now, on a certain level, that's performance enhancing. Like I said, it's going to keep you in your groove. It's going to improve your efficiency in the big lifts. But the secondary consequences of losing that range of motion is you're going to create a bunch of compressive strategies. So you're more likely to see a bunch of soft tissue injuries, because the concentric orientation associated with the compressive strategies will reduce blood flow to key areas like connective tissues and bone and things like that. And so that's why you're going to see a lot of the soft tissue injuries that you see in powerlifters. That's why you're going to see the progressive arthritic conditions in powerlifters. So the thing that I want you to understand is, yes, I'm talking about performance. Yes, I'm intentionally compressing you. And yes, you're going to increase your powerlifting performance, but there is going to be consequences that are going to compromise your health in the long term. So please keep those in mind. You get to be an adult. You get to make all of your own decisions here. But the reality is that the harder you drive yourself into these positions, the more likely you are to experience the negative secondary consequences associated with high levels of concentric orientation over prolonged periods of time and exhalation strategies, which could compromise who knows how many different levels of health. Rena, I hope that answers your question for you. It gives you a lot to think about. Make good decisions. And I will see you guys coaches and coffee tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, 6 a.m. Don't forget that. And I will see you guys